Hello, and welcome to Pagan Perspectives with Georgina Rose. I am your host, Georgina Rose, and in this podcast, I give essentially perspectives on topics that we deal with in our day to day lives. I take esotericism, metaphysics, and paganism and basically extrapolate that outwards to our day to day lives, mundane issues, and things that we deal with on the regular. Though sometimes these episodes do end up a bit more esoteric than the original concept was. Sometimes they are kind of more commentary on paganism and occultism. But this episode is really about, something that kind of bridges that. It's about holidays. So, holidays are something that I think people learn about first when they get into paganism. It's one of the first things we're taught, especially if you came in through any sort of Western esotericism or witchcraft, basically pipeline. Like, if you started with anything that was adjacent to Wicca or you had any Wicca influence early on, you probably heard a lot about holidays early on. I find those traditions actually teach it first. Now, if you came in through some other pathway, because I know a lot of people who listen to me now came in through things like Platonism and Nordic paganism and other pathways in, you might not be as familiar with the pagan holiday discussion. So I'm going to talk about pagan holidays, but I'm not just going to talk about like which ones people celebrate. I'm going to talk about what a holiday is, how we should approach holidays, how we should celebrate holidays, discourses like stolen pagan holidays, because that comes up a lot. How should we deal with secular holidays or cultural holidays? What holidays people do celebrate. I'm going to get into that. I'm going to get into the fact that there is more diversity in what people are celebrating than just, the Wiccan wheel of the year, because that is definitely the thing that comes up the most. I'm going to talk about that wheel, criticism of that wheel, other pagan holiday systems, Nordic holidays, Hellenic holidays, adjacent things like Thelemic and Hermetic holidays. And, how should we approach holidays? Are people doing like cafeteria spirituality when they're choosing what holidays to celebrate? And the sort of, elephant in the room that it's very easy as a pagan for a lot of your holidays ending up being very solitary and kind of lonely, and how to address that as a community. Now, of course, that bit will be less relevant if you're in a group, but I know a lot of people who follow me are solitary, so I want to hit onto that thing too, because I think a lot of people don't talk about that. So first thing, we need to define what a holiday is. So what a holiday is in the name. Holiday means holy day or sacred day or special day. Now, historically, holidays have kind of always been religious in nature. They've always related to theology. And now, there's a lot of holidays we deal with that are not holy in the sense of religion. Like there's things like Thanksgiving and, the 4th of July. And, if you're in other countries, your respective Independence Day, right? There's a lot of other holidays that are not, wholly theological. And I'm going to actually talk about those a little bit too. But I think the best way to define holiday is either a holy day or a special day that's worthy of celebration for some sort of reason that is relevant to you religiously, culturally, or spiritually, right? So modern holidays and the way we celebrate them in a communal way is of course going to vary depending on where you live, right? Like your culture is going to affect that. But generally what happens is people, they come together, they have food, they host big celebrations, they host parties. And that's kind of like what holidays are for most people, right? There's certain themes that are associated with different holidays, certain, traditions people have, right? Like holidays are rich with traditions, whether that's familial or societal or national, right? And they're very important, right? Holidays, I think for many people are how they conceptualize of the year, right? They and I'm recording this pretty quickly after the 4th of July. I just had that, and that's of course I'm an American. That's pretty relevant in America. And for me, I really like watching the fireworks every year because they kind of mark when the dog days of summer begin. I know technically they begin on the 3rd, but for me, I'm like, okay, it's about to get really, really hot. It sort of roots me in the cycle of the year, holidays themselves. And so I think holidays are very, very important. And of course, on a spiritual level, we understand holidays are especially important days, right? They're special days. They're the days when we're closer to the gods, when we do specific rituals that we do every single year, right? And when people get into paganism, they want holidays, right? Humans like holidays because they're special, but also because it's social, it's important, it's a big part of what defines a religion, right? Things we know about religions that we learn in school, like if you've ever taken a world history class, right? One of the ways, at least when I took one, that they define different religions, they're and Jews celebrate Hanukkah, and Muslims celebrate Ramadan, and Christians celebrate Christmas, right? Holidays are very much used to define religions in a large sense. And so as pagans, we want to learn that. And so some of the first things people learn are about holidays for many people. And I'm going to get into that. Now, I want to talk about kind of, I'm gonna actually start with the Wheel of the Year. I wasn't gonna get into that first, but I think it's kind of worth discussing because generally, when people get into paganism, if they come in through witchcraft or something like that, one of the first things they're taught about is the Wiccan Wheel of the Year. And a lot of people who honor the Wiccan Wheel of the Year aren't even Wiccan, right? They're like really popular. I mean, I see people who even like go online and like are, really, really critical of Wicca, discussing, the Wheel of the Year. Like, right, they're pretty highly brought up. And this wheel was created, sort of created by Gerald Gardner. So really, originally the Wiccan Wheel of the Year was 4 holidays, and then it became 8. And the original 4 were the solstices and the equinoxes. So that's those big 4 corner points of the year, right? When each season begins. And when we're looking at, like the feeling of the year, we understand that pagans are typically very earth based, typically very nature oriented, right? Like there's no pagan faith I can think of that isn't partially about, reconnecting with the land, right? So it makes sense to honor the solstices and equinoxes. Pretty much every pagan religion does celebrate the solstices and the equinoxes. Now, their exact celebration date might vary. And that sort of gets into the weeds a little bit because technically, like some cultures conceived of them slightly differently due to climate zones and whatnot. And they're not, they vary very slightly, but generally those things are celebrated. Now the Wiccan Wheel of the Year expanded pretty early on into Wicca's history. So it was originally those 4. And it actually, those 4 come from, the obvious intuition of the seasons. But before Wicca, Gerald Gardner, the founder of Wicca, was a member of the OTO, or the Ordo Templi Orientis, which is the main order that's kind of associated with Thelema. I mean, there's another one, there's the AA. But Gerald Gardner was very much enmeshed in Thelema before he went off and created Wicca. And within Thelema, those 4 points are celebrated, but no cross quarters. And he continued that. I would say Wicca was kind of a project to take the good from Western esotericism and then kind of bring it back to reviving Celtic paganism. I think that's kind of what the project was. Because when we look at Gerald Gardner, essentially he was this guy who was very, very interested in witchcraft. And I'm going to write a Substack article this upcoming week about kind of Wicca, and because I think a lot of people don't understand what Wicca originally was, because nowadays, there's this eclectic internet Wicca that is really nothing like original Wicca. Like the beliefs are really, really divergent. I mean, the Wheel of the Year seems to be kind of the thing that's remained steady. But other than that, I think internet neo-Wicca and original Wicca are very, very, very different. But yeah, so Gerald Gardner, he had this Western esoteric background. He was interested in the occult. And he read this writer, Margaret Murray, who was a very important English historian around that time. And timeline, I was talking about like the early 1900s. And Margaret Murray had this big thesis. And interestingly, she's more historically regarded as an Egyptologist. That's really the crux of like her work that's still held up. But she wrote this very intense and perhaps even inflammatory book called The Witch Cult of Western Europe that basically posited that, paganism actually never died off, right? Paganism is continuous, right? There was no end of paganism and beginning of Christianity. Basically what happened is paganism went underground and it survived amongst this witch cult. And they took on that name witch because that's what, of course, was used to persecute them. So it kind of alleges this persecution of witches that secretly persisted, that there was a flame of Celtic paganism that never went away, that sort of existed on the fringes and in the woods of England. That was kind of this historical essay. Now, this book, very, very controversial. In modern historicism, it has been debunked. I love saying debunked, but I guess when I'm saying something serious, I shouldn't say it was debunked. But yes, modern historians really hate this book. Actually, it's talked very, very negatively. It's considered to be like literally like fan fiction. Now, there are a lot of people who do not hold that opinion, though. I think it's worth considering that there are a lot of people who do believe the witch cult of Western Europe is real, and that basically like the Academy is like covering it up or something. It gets kind of conspiratorial. Whatever you think about it, I do think it's worth, maybe reading the book, understanding that it was a really important idea when people were kind of bringing back paganism, right? Like, because even if you hate Wicca, right? And a lot of people have some good criticism of Wicca. You have to understand that paganism would not be like a mainstream revival without Wicca happening. There were other attempts to revive paganism around the same time. There were some people bringing back Nordic paganism and stuff like that, but none of it really got as popular as Wicca did, right? I think Wicca's blow up is really the cause of paganism being a popular religion. And I think a lot of people listening to this, whether they know it or not, might not be pagan now without Wicca gaining a lot of traction. So I think it's worth understanding Wicca. And one of the ways Wicca has really remained in the culture is the Wheel of the Year. Now, this Witch Cult of Western Europe thing, very strong belief held by people. There are still people who believe in it. I would say young Wiccans tend not to, but I think older generations absolutely do believe in this wholeheartedly. And so if you understand this, the reason why Gerald Gardner, confirmed this is true, right? He read this book, and then according to him, and there's a book by Ronald Hutton on this whole journey that he went down, where basically he believed he made contact with these women called the New Forest Coven. The book is called In Search of the New Forest Coven by Ronald Hutton. It's a very interesting book, and it gets into basically, is this real, right? It searches for, is the New Forest Coven around? What is the New Forest Coven? Excuse me, it's actually not by Ronald Hutton. It's by Philip Heselton. Apologies. I want to make sure I get that correct because this is a very important book, and it is essentially claiming it happened. Right? Now, whether you guys want to think this happened, I think it's kind of, debatable. I don't know. There are certainly people who wholeheartedly believe in the New Forest Coven and believe that this happened. So, you know, it's worth considering. But basically, the story goes Gerald Gardner, fresh off reading this book, fresh off discovering that he actually wants to make things more pagan. Because when you look at Thelema is more pagan than Hermeticism, but it's not as pagan as things like Wicca become, right? So he claims he had this encounter with these women in the New Forest Coven. He made contact with them, and they initiated him into their coven. And their coven was one of these witch cults, right? It's one of these surviving groups. And once again, this is a very debatable claim. There are books that have been written talking about how this happened, right? There are people who are like, yeah, this happened. There's some sources that kind of allege this happened, and there's some sources that are very opposed to it. But anyways, basically the story goes, he meets the New Forest Coven. They are the witch cult of Western Europe. He's run across them, and they initiate him in. They teach him their secret mysteries, and they were celebrating the equinoxes and the solstices. They were not celebrating the cross quarters. So, he has these experiences and he starts Wicca, the witch religion. And the word Wicca is like I think it's a Saxon or a Gaelic word for wise. And, taking on that mantle of, that persecution of the witch, right? Wicca becomes a witch religion, right? That's very much a inflammatory stance, right? That is, of course, them reclaiming this term and trying to make it, more like happy and peace-loving. But it is also, and I think it's worth mentioning, kind of like an anti-Christian stance to some extent. Right, because it is, there is very much an assumption within this that there is a persecuted European witch cult that have been persecuted since the beginning of Christianity, and that Christianity is sort of on the prowl to extinguish European spirituality. Now, once again, you guys can all have a conversation about that, but that is kind of the claim, and that's what we need to look at when we're talking about Wicca. So when we look at these solstices and equinoxes, those were the key celebrations. But Gerald Gardner, with his coven, the Gardnerian Coven, people wanted more celebrations. They loved the solstices and the equinoxes, and they wanted more holidays. So add in the cross quarters. So that's basically halfway between the solstice and the equinox, you get another celebration, and these are known as Sabbat. Not Sabbath with an H, that's the Jewish thing. Sabbat with a T. S-A-B-B-A-T, not S-A-B-B-A-T-H, right? And these holidays are the most widely celebrated pagan holidays. Even by people who do not like Wicca, they are widely celebrated because let's be real, those 8, points on the wheel are really rooting. They show you what's happening. They connect you to the seasons, right? They stick around for a reason. They outlast Wicca because a lot of people aren't Wiccan now. I wouldn't say the majority of new pagans are becoming Wiccans. I think Wicca is kind of like descending currently. I did a podcast talking about why I think Wicca's in fall a while ago. It's called The Rise and Fall of Wicca. But this stuff has remained. People really enjoy these holidays. And I'm going to go through them quickly, because there are people, who have talked in great depth about these holidays, but I want to discuss them because they are probably the pagan holidays most people have heard of. So I'm going to start with the winter solstice, or Yule. Yule is the beginning of the year. Yule is the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. It is, of course, that term comes from Nordic holidays. So one of the big things people feel about the Wheel of the Year that people feel negatively about is that it's a mix of Celtic and Nordic stuff. It's kind of like a pan-European wheel. It's not, strictly like English paganism, because obviously Gerald Gardner was an Englishman. So some people don't like that it's a mix of things. And, a lot of modern pagans kind of do celebrate a mix of holidays coming from different places. Like a lot of people kind of do mix things up, right? They're not solely celebrating, say, Nordic or Celtic holidays. They're kind of bringing things together, or they're not solely celebrating Roman holidays, right? A lot of people are kind of mixing it. And I think that that does originate with the Wheel of the Year, because the Wheel of the Year really does mix stuff, right? It has one holiday that's like very clearly Irish. This one is very clearly Nordic. And, some people don't actually find this a bad thing. Some people like, all these pagan traditions being brought together. Some people like the syncretism. I mean, very much in a lot of Greco-Roman theology, I mean, all the gods existed, right? It's not like you have to pick a side. I mean, as a soft polytheist, I do believe all the gods are real. I don't believe one single pantheon is true. But of course, if you are a reconstructionist of a specific pantheon, that's not my situation. But if that is you, like say you're a diehard Alsa True person, you might not want to syncretize everything together. But the Wheel of the Year definitely syncretizes everything together. But yes, basically, this is Yule. It is the most widely celebrated pagan holiday, I would say, of all, except maybe Samhain. Because Yule is really right on Christmas. It's like a couple days prior to Christmas. And many people talk about how Yule is a stolen holiday. The traditions are largely, I mean, borrowed or syncretized. I kind of maintain the position that holidays being stolen are kind of better than them having died out. Like, I kind of prefer that, there are things like the Christmas tree and the Saturnalia tradition of giving gifts that stayed strong from paganism than the reverse, because kind of what happened is when Christianity, swept into Europe, right? It definitely did like kind of assimilate everything into it. Like it tried to syncretize as much as possible because people kind of didn't want to give up their holidays. So I kind of see it as a survival. And people use this term pagan survival, or things that sort of last from paganism into the modern world, into the Christian world, into even the secular world. Because I would say we're not really in a Christian world these days. We're in a more secular one, as much as some people are protesting that. I think these pagan survivals are better than nothing surviving, right? I think that is the better alternative. Do I wish the conversion never happened? Obviously, I wish it never happened. But if it did, I think it is good that people were able to remain, in touch with a lot of their ancestral traditions. I think that is better than nothing. And so Yule, I mean, it's a lot of the Christmas stuff. And I want to mention celebrating Christmas. People, debate this every year. Like, is it okay for, pagans to celebrate Christmas? And I think it is, because I think, we also are social beings, right? We live in a society. I mean, I like the Joker music, like playing under that, like, the society audio on TikTok where it's the Joker, like it's like society. But like we do live in a society. I said the meme. And we need to consider that we live in a society, right? We live in a social world. And for many people who live in the West, Christmas is when a lot of cultural things happen. Like when I lived in New York, there was the Christmas tree lighting. Now, like my family does those Christmas crackers every year. We all have dinner. We all get together. It's really pleasant. We give gifts. Like a lot of that, I mean, first of all, a lot of it is pagan. Like, let's be honest there. But even the stuff, that isn't, like, say, going to church with your family on Christmas, right? I do this. I go with my parents to their Episcopal church on Christmas. I do it every year. They always ask me, like, if I'm okay with it. Like, they're very considering. I mean, my family has never had an issue with my occult and pagan beliefs. This has never been a contention. I did not have that kind of experience where my family had a huge problem with me becoming pagan. They've always been, very supportive, and I appreciate that. But yeah, I go with them every year voluntarily. Why? Why do I do that? Because it's important to them. No, I'm not celebrating the birth of Jesus, right? Like, I'm not a Christian, but I understand that that is important for them. And I love my family and I love my community. So I'm going to do things that my community does, right? I'm going to go to the little Christmas events and, drive down the streets where they've lit up all the houses, right? Like, I think it's important to consider that holidays are also communal. And I'm going to get into, repaganizing your community in a little bit, but I think it's important to maintain these communal traditions and care about our family and be there for them. I don't think we need to be antisocial and like refuse to go things, because let's be real, like, it's not like it's an attack on the gods to like sit at Christmas service with your family if that matters to them. Now, I wouldn't take communion. I don't take communion at the Episcopal Church. I just sit there. Nobody ever really asked me anything about that. I just don't. But yeah, I mean, it's totally fine. And you can stay silent during the prayers. Like, if you don't want to say those things, I like say like anything that I agree with and then I'm silent for part of them. I mean, maybe I look a little weird, but it's important that my family has me there, even if they don't directly ask it. They like having me with them, and I like to be with them on the whole day. So think about communities and like being like socially normal. I think, having a good world includes good communities, and we should be there with our communities on days that are important to them. But yes, Yule, most Yule traditions are pagan, like the original stuff, like the trees and the log. Like, we always in my family had that, that brown Yule log cake. Yeah, like all of that is pagan. So actually, if anything, you should like intercept people's Christmas celebrations and like paganize it as much as possible. Use the word Yule, get one of those like, Yule sweaters, like really, be with people and bring them together. Now, the next one is a cross quarter. So this is a halfway point, and that is Imbolc. So Imbolc is now an Irish holiday. Imbolc is February 1st. I have my little, I have a placard on the wall with the wheel of the year that says it, so I don't have to memorize the dates, so I can just look at them whenever, because I'm terrible with dates. But yes, this is a celebration of Brigid. Brigid is a Irish goddess of healing, childbirth, inspiration, and fire. She's a fire goddess. This is a fire festival. This is all about kindling new life, initiation, birth, and Brigid is also Saint Brigid of Ireland. She was basically like morphed into a saint from a goddess because her cult was so popular. And then there's now Candlemas, which is like the modern Imbolc, like it's like literally like Catholic Imbolc. Now, Imbolc is one of those where I find for specific people is a very important holiday, and for everyone else is kind of irrelevant. I would say if you're going to skip something on the wheel of the year, this is like kind of irrelevant if you're not like an Irish pagan. Like I say a prayer to Brigid every Imbolc, but that's like all I do because I'm not, a Brigid worshiper. I'm not, the hearth cult is not a huge part of my practice, but it's still nice to think about the themes of the hearth because the sacred hearth is a part of paganism. Like there is the idea of like the sacred hearth and tending the hearth and the spirituality of the home. And so it's a good time to reflect on that, but it's certainly not one of those that I would say is obligatory, right? Like it's for a specific goddess. It's a specific like Irish pagan holiday. And, it is one of those where it's kind of like they were just kind of adding a celebration there. Anyways, the next one is Ostara, or the spring equinox, or the vernal equinox. It is okay. So we're gonna get into some discourse. So there is a goddess Eoster who is a Germanic goddess of spring. In the 1970s, it was named for Eoster. This is one of those that was not emphasized very heavily, and it is a little bit before Easter. People like to claim Easter is stolen from Ostara. I think that evidence is pretty weak. Now, are most Easter celebrations stolen from, pagan festivals? Yeah, like most, like the rabbit and the eggs, like that's fertility. Jesus dying has absolutely nothing to do with fertility, like no connection there. But I mean, it's a good one. I don't know. I mean, this is one where like Eoster, I believe Eoster is a real goddess. I have had spiritual interactions with Eoster. A lot of people argue that she didn't exist. I think she exists because I've had spiritual experience with her, and you see her in some legends. But yeah, I mean, now you've got a Germanic holiday coming into your wheel of the year. You've got kind of some more stuff coming in. Spring equinox though is highly important, specifically because that is the beginning of the astrological new year, and so I actually recommend everyone celebrate the spring equinox. Now, do you need to celebrate Ostara? No. But you should celebrate the spring equinox. Within Thelema, a tradition that I've spent a lot of time in, it's actually considered to be the equinox of the gods. It is considered to be the most important of all equinoxes. It's a highly, highly important one because once again, that's when the sun enters Aries. That's the beginning of the astrological procession, right? This is in a sense the most sacred holiday of the year, all right? In Thelema, it is considered the most sacred holiday of the year because it is when the cycle begins. And if you have any sort of solar orientation on your paganism, you should pay attention to this because once again, that's the first sign for the sun. And also like Aries and the sun, like that's a very strong correlation astrologically. And so that date, very, very valuable. It's the best time to start new things. It's a good time to do a big solar ritual, right? Go out at noon. Like I go every noon on the spring equinox. I do a big ritual. So very, very valuable. Ostara, I think, is a bit less relevant than the spring equinox, but that one is a really important one. I really, in general, recommend all pagans celebrate the equinoxes and the solstices. Whether you care about any sort of cross-quarter holiday, I think that's more a personal choice. Now, the next thing I want to look at is Beltane. Beltane is halfway between spring and summer. Beltane is the opposite of Samhain. So Samhain is the pagan Halloween holiday. And the relevance of Beltane, Beltane is also May Day, the workers' holiday. And the night before it is Walpurgisnacht. I think of Walpurgisnacht and Beltane as a match. Same with if you're from Germany, you might know the term Hexennacht. So basically, there's a big belief that the night before Beltane, so this would be, the day before the 1st of May, there are a lot of communing with the devil, lots of scary witchcraft superstitions. That image of the witch's Sabbath, where women like sneak out of their body and like meet with the devil and I don't know, do all sorts of scandalous things, allegedly happened on this date. On the day before this date. And then on May 1st, it's a holy day and those things get cast out. Now, the witch's Sabbath as a concept, I talked about this a bit in my sabbatic witchcraft video that I did years ago. Sabbatic witchcraft is a tradition of witchcraft. Now, it is not a pagan tradition of witchcraft, and I want to emphasize that because sabbatic witchcraft is exploring European witch lore after the conversion. This is not paganism. Now, is it a witchcraft tradition? Yes, but I would say this is really actually kind of like a weird Abrahamic, like inverse Abrahamic witchcraft tradition. It's kind of its own thing. Now, there are some similar kind of ideas like with spirit travel and beneficia and all of this. So I'm not discounting that tradition. I'm just saying it's not really like a full pagan tradition, but if you partake in any of those traditions outside of paganism, right? That would be then. In general, though, Beltane is like a very sacred day. It's one of those fertility holidays. It was believed that in I think it was Wales, Ireland, Scotland, maybe England, the British Isles, people would do a lot of fertility work on this day in the ancient world. It's a big fertility holiday, lots of fertility workings, and sexual mysticism around this time of year, honoring Pan. This would be a good time to do that. I like Beltane a lot. And also, if you kind of think of like the veil between worlds, this is a belief that a lot of people have, like the veil between worlds or the line between the spirit and the material world thins and thickens in various places and in various times of the year, and is believed that during Beltane and Samhain, the veil is the thinnest. So for spirit communication and stuff, it is the strongest. I find people tend to have a lot of spontaneous spiritual experiences around this time of year. Like a lot of weird stuff happens right around Beltane. So just some stuff to kind of keep in mind. The next one is Litha, or the summer solstice. Very few people, I think, celebrate it under the name Litha. I think most people do just celebrate the summer solstice. The name Litha comes from an Anglo-Saxon calendar. It's Saxon paganism is where we get the term Litha. So once again, another kind of, pan-Northern European type influence coming in. We really bring all of Northern Europe together when we talk about Wicca. But really what people are celebrating around here is the summer solstice. The summer solstice is the peak of the sun. It happened relatively recently, and this is one of the most widely celebrated pagan dates. Now, a lot of people call it Litha. The name Litha was kind of just chosen by Gerald Gardner when he was looking at some Saxon stuff. So once again, with Litha, you're really just looking at the summer solstice and honoring the sun and feeling the sun go through you. So that's an important one. In general, the summer solstices are pretty valuable. Like the solstices in general, they're also big astrological events, like the sun enters Cancer on the summer solstice, right? So if you do any sort of astrological or planetary magic, I mean, these are some of the most important days for that. Obviously, you guys know I'm a planetary magician, so I care a lot about these dates, and they're very sacred to me. Now, the next one is Lammas, oh God, I'm so sorry, everyone. Lunasida, Lugnast. I don't know. It's named after Lu, which is the god of light in the Celtic world. This is another kind of Celtic name. Lammas means loaf mass. So this is a harvest festival or bread day, as someone I know used to call it. It's very much, you're honoring, the sun, and you're honoring, agricultural stuff. This actually really kind of did exist within Christianity. Like Lammas was a Christian thing. So you're really honoring like summer's bounty and harvests, and it marks the beginning of harvest stuff. If you live a more rural life, like let's say you're a homesteader or you garden a lot or something like that, Lammas might have an extreme significance to you because it's the beginning of your picking season. So if you really do want to, reconnect to the land and live a more, down to the land lifestyle, Lammas is really, really relevant. Now, if you do not, right? Whether you live in a more rural area or a city area, if you're not growing a lot, this holiday, it's really easy to feel disconnected from. I find this is, of all pagan holidays, the one that people struggle with the most, actually. Because if you don't live a somewhat agricultural lifestyle, if you don't live a more rural lifestyle, you can feel kind of detached from this one. It can feel kind of, distant from you. It can feel kind of irrelevant even. So I recommend if you're gonna, skip one, this could be one to skip. But at the same time, I almost feel weird saying that because I feel like we should be more connected to the land, right? We should be more connected to the earth and rooted in the earth. And so in a sense, trying to understand what Lammas means to you can be really valuable. And it is also, we live in somewhat of, for most people, they're food secure. They aren't dealing with food insecurity. So you don't have to think about like the gratitude for simply having bread much. So this could be a good one to prompt thinking, I think, because and think about what our ancestors went through when they, had no food, right? Like it is something to consider and process why you feel weird about it, because a lot of people feel weird about it. Now, the next one is Mabon. Okay, there's a lot of discourse about this. So Mabon is the autumn equinox. So once again, equinox is vitally important, right? Because when we look at the equinox and solstice cycle, we're seeing, that Jungian idea of life, death, and rebirth replay again and again and again every year. The sun is born on the winter solstice because that's when the sun comes back. That's when each day starts getting longer. When it reaches the summer solstice, that's when the days begin to get shorter and shorter. It's past its peak, right? It's starting to deteriorate and decline. And then when we hit the fall, we're sort of hitting like old age, right? If you think of like the life cycle of a human sort of visualized through the cycle of the year, you see birth on the winter solstice. You see aging, and well, I guess more like adolescence through the spring equinox, and then adulthood through the summer solstice, and then old age through the fall, and then death as we approach that winter. If you can think of it, that shortest night of the year right before the solstice is essentially death, and then rebirth is the next day. And so within Thelema, a ceremonial magic Western tradition, we're taught to see that as like a microcosm of the whole cycle. And consider it like that. And with the we're seeing old age, right? Now, Mabon is also, if you think about this veil thinning concept, this is when the veil starts to get really thin. It's when fall begins. And there is some controversy about the name Mabon, because basically Mabon is named after a Welsh god named Mabon ap Modron, and a lot of people who are Welsh pagans complain about this and complain that Mabon is, sometimes they say it's a misspelling, sometimes they say it's a misuse, sometimes they're kind of weird about it. So there is some discourse about it. People just really feel weird about the name Mabon. They don't like that it's named that. I don't know. I mean, I'm not Welsh personally. I don't think the term, it's not like people are saying the term's offensive or something. They just think it's being misused is kind of the problem with it. Like, it's not that it's honoring that god. Nobody has a problem with people honoring the god of Mabon. They just feel like I don't remember if it's that it's spelled wrong or it's used wrong. Like, it's something with that specific name bothers people. And once again, that speaks to the large criticism of the Wheel of the Year as sort of like bringing a bunch of European holidays into one. But at the same time, if you have a syncretic perspective, that might be why you like the Wheel of the Year, right? So this is kind of that sort of inner pagan schism coming out. Like, do you think it's good if all of, and actually leave it in the comments, because I think this is a fun discussion. Do you think it's good if we bring all of European paganism kind of together, or do you think they should exist fully separate? I'm a syncretic person. I don't think theologically they're separate, so I don't actually have a problem with it, but I think there are some interesting conversations that can be had. People get really lively about it, and I think it's a good discussion to think about. I like it as a prompter. Now, the next one is everyone's other favorite holiday, that is Samhain. Samhain is not a solstice or equinox. People often think Samhain is the most important pagan holiday when they are new, especially people coming in through witchcraft. No, it is not the most important. It's everyone's favorite, though, because Samhain is the same time as Halloween, and Halloween is spooky, and people who like witchcraft stuff and paganism tend to like spooky things. Samhain is when the veil is thinnest. Samhain is associated with death, because once again, it's that last solstice, last Sabbat, before the rebirth of the winter solstice. It's the last holiday before them. So it does represent pure death. It is a Celtic name. It derives from the Celtic term Samhain, meaning summer's end. And people do a lot of time with their ancestors, right? This is a really ancestral veneration holiday. So I really recommend Samhain to people, even if they don't like Wicca, because, thinking about your ancestors and thinking about that thin veil is very valuable, because ancestral spirituality is what we need, right? We need to honor our ancestors. We need to connect to our ancestors. There is no religion in the world that goes against connecting to your ancestors. And so this is a great time. There's this thing a lot of people do called the dumb supper, where they sit there in silence and they have a meal with their ancestors and they reflect on it. Samhain is actually very pensive. It's quiet. It's a lot about that internal world, and it's a great time to do things like shadow work and explore sort of the darker parts of ourselves. So Samhain, I will say Samhain is a lot more somber than I think it's billed to people. I think a lot of people are like, yay, witch holiday, yay, yay, yay. And they don't consider the actual like metaphysical themes of Samhain as the themes of death and ancestry. And so it's really worth considering what Samhain truly means, not just like spooky vibes. But I mean, I'm not knocking people for spooky vibes. I love a pumpkin spice latte. I get one like the second they sell them at my local coffee shop, right? So, enjoy all the fun of Samhain, but also remember that it is like a somber, serious holiday. Now, another way to conceptualize the Wheel of the Year outside of Wicca, because I mentioned those Wicca criticisms that it, knocks a lot of different cultures together. The other main criticism is that its timing doesn't make sense. Because I will say, if you live in, say, the southern U.S., like I do, I live in Appalachia. Sometimes it feels like the summer and the winter are not exactly on those dates. So there are some people who actually argue that you shouldn't celebrate the solstices and the equinoxes on those dates. You should celebrate them based on when your season starts to change, and you should look at your local farmer's almanac and like calculate when these things actually happen. Now, I do not do this, and I want to share why. The reason why I use the solstice and equinox dates and I stick to these more traditional dates is because I have a very astrological perspective on my paganism, right? I care a lot about what's happening in the stars. I have a lot of, celestial orientation. And if you are celebrating based on your locale and based on your seasons, and let's say you live in the tropics and you just have a dry and wet season, if you're celebrating like that, you're going to be missing on those astrological levels. Now, what you can do, and what I've heard of people doing, is they celebrate, the seasonal stuff on the days that it actually, like the longest day and shortest day. Like they buy a farmer's almanac, they calculate that, and then they celebrate the astrological solstices and equinoxes too. That's certainly a choice some people make. I don't. I stick to the classics, but some people do celebrate on local lines. I find if you're really into like your local, the genus loci, right? Like let's say you honor the genus loci or the spirits of the land of your place. Those dates might be a little bit different. So it's worth, considering how genus loci based are your traditions, how astrologically oriented are you, and then from there kind of discerning what you want to do. Now, you also can celebrate the solstices and equinoxes with no Wicca influence, right? You don't have to like the wheel of the year, and you can celebrate it other ways. So if you are a Hellenic pagan, Demeter and Persephone's cycle is a wheel cycle. That is a wheel of the year cycle, and that's that same story of life, death, and rebirth. So you can honor it on those days. You can do rituals to Persephone and Demeter on those respective dates. That's a way to do it. There also are, within different traditions, different holidays. So within Greek and Roman paganism, this is where things start to diverge. There are a lot of holidays, right? There are, of course, these kind of agricultural festivities. There's ones that align with that, like Saturnalia is definitely the most famous Hellenic holiday because it is, that Saturn Kronos celebration right on December. The days tend to go longer with Hellenic paganism. They tend to have festivals over the course of a week. There are, certain things like, Janus rules over the month of January. Janus is the gods of new beginnings and new endings. And so you can celebrate that, on the beginning of the year. There are other things like Vestalia. That is a festival to honor the goddess Vesta. And that is from June 7th to June 15th. There are, a lot of these festivals. There's Dionysia. There's like, that's a Dionysus holiday. There is Lupercalia. That one's very famous. That's this kind of like, love and sex type festival that happens right around Valentine's Day. Many people argue that Valentine's Day is a stolen Lupercalia. To some extent, kind of, also kind of not. There is also, I want to bring up the other thing about Lupercalia is like kind of like an ancient pagan Valentine's Day. It's a very much a sex and fertility oriented festival, but it also is about eliminating miasma or spiritual pollution. There's a lot of purification that goes alongside Lupercalia. And so I think Lupercalia's kind of reputation as a wholly like Dionysian sex holiday really does a disservice to the anti-miasma sentiment that happens during Lupercalia. And also, I know a lot of people who are into Hellenic paganism really celebrate Hecate's Depanon. So Hecate's Depanon is a specific thing that happens at the end of the lunar month. And there's a specific one that also happens like once a year. Like there's a couple, these kind of like meal-based holidays to Hecate where people have these specific meal that you honor to Hecate. Some people do a charitable thing too, where like they'll have that meal with Hecate, they'll honor Hecate, and then they'll give an offering to, like an offering of a donated meal to someone. Because there is some stuff in certain ancient Greek writing that shows that Hecatean worshippers would give an offering to the poor during Hecate's Depanon, and then there is a lot of rituals that go along with that. I find Hecate is very, very popular. Hecate's mysteries, those lunar dark feminine mysteries, are really highly honored by a lot of people, and so for Greek and Roman pagans, they might stick to that. If you're a Greek and Roman pagan, it might make sense to literally look at the Roman and Greek pagan calendars and consider what holidays you want to celebrate. Now, I will say, you could celebrate every single Greek and Roman pagan holiday, but that's not really how people were doing it in the ancient world. There were some that like the whole state celebrated, that like everyone celebrated, and then there are some that were just kind of the cult of that god. Most people do not worship all of the gods. That's very difficult. So I think when it comes to like these type of traditions where there's a ton of holidays, right, tons and tons of pagan holidays, It's worth considering like which ones are actually relevant to your type of worship and your type of practice, and then decide from there, because that's kind of how it worked in the ancient world. Now, everyone was doing things like Saturnalia, but not everyone was maybe doing Vestalia, right? So it's worth considering, what cults within your cult you honor. Now, for Nordic pagans, there are specific holidays known as blots that people honor. These are these religious ceremonies. Technically, blot just means like kind of like an offering, but there are specific holidays people call kind of blots. There are major holidays that they do, right? And a lot of people who are into Nordic paganism are really interested in basically completely reconstructing. They're the most reconstructive. And I've seen a version where people, call these holidays blots, and they do, only blots on these specific holidays. There's a specific Norse calendar that literally is like blots that are kind of like a wheel of the year. Like there's Somramal, which is the beginning of summer. There's Midsommar. There's Vetranatter, and I'm so sorry to my Nordic pagan followers. I really am bad at these languages. I apologize. And then Midwinter or Midwinter or Yule, right? Kind of all of that. They do it like seasonally. There's a number of other blots that happen. Like there are these big, holidays. There is kind of a wheel of the year. And people have made actual charts where they've put it on the wheel. People really like calling all pagan systems like their version of the wheel of the year. Because let's be real, like that wheel calendar is a really easy calendar. And it does keep people in track. Now, if you follow, say, Celtic paganism, you'll have your own holidays, right? Like every system that's reconstructionist is going to reconstruct these ancient holidays, right? But I still see people who use the wheel of the year, the Wiccan wheel of the year, because it's pretty good. Like there are problems with it, and if you hold those criticisms of like it's syncretizing a bunch of stuff you don't like, I want only one form of European paganism to reconstruct. Go do the blots. Go do only the alia. Greek alias. Alia is funny. I'm gonna start calling them alias because that is how the Greek call it. Lupercalia, Saturnalia, Vestalia, right? The alias. Yeah, I mean, just do that. Nobody is like forcing you at gunpoint to do the wheel of the year. Now, it is really annoying how so many discussions about holidays are strictly about the wheel of the year, which is the ultimate hypocrisy. I've talked about the wheel of the year for most of this podcast, but that's because that is what most people celebrate. Now, something I want to talk about is kind of like this question that I was talking with actually a Christian I knew, who was giving this point of, nowadays people are doing this thing where they make their own wheel, where they basically like take the wheel holidays they like, or they shift it onto something else. They kind of make their own wheel and create their own set of holidays or whatever, using holidays that already exist. It's not like they're inventing holidays. It's like they take the holidays that are there and they like decide what holidays they want, and then they make their own little wheel. And they argue that this is cafeteria spirituality. And cafeteria spirituality is a term that comes from Christians, where basically they kind of like insult each other by saying like Christians who just take the parts of the Bible they want and ignore the rest are cafeteria Christians. And, basically the argument is this is cafeteria spirituality, which ironically is the exact argument that people throw at the Wiccan Wheel of the Year. The Wiccan Wheel of the Year is just cherry picking European pagan festivities from all around Northern Europe that it wants to use. And I think the answer to that is, if that is a problem to you, go with only the reconstructed holidays, right? Celebrate the bloat calendar, right? Don't do the wheel of the year. Like don't do it. I mean, some people are more comfortable with syncretism than others, right? Syncretism within the ancient world was very much a thing. Syncretism is not a modern idea. The ancient world was highly, highly syncretic. But if you don't like syncretism, don't do syncretism, right? There's no one stopping you. In fact, you can make your own pagan organization where all syncretism is banned. Nobody's stopping you. I mean, I just want people worshiping the gods. I don't necessarily care if they do it with syncretism or without, right? So if you want to be really anti-syncretism and you hate that element of it, you don't have to do it. And you don't have to avoid holidays because you're like, oh my God, I'm not dealing with that because it's all just cherry picking. I hate it, right? If that's how you feel, look for those histories, because there's a lot of data, I would say more so than pretty much anything else, on pagan festivities, because historians were very interested in preserving that. And so in a sense, the best information we have on systems is on their holidays. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is community infrastructure. So one of the things that sucks if you're a solitary practitioner or a new practitioner is you can feel really lonely on holidays, because let's say you're celebrating, I don't know, like midsummer. You're celebrating midsummer and no one else is a pagan, and you're like, this is kind of sad if I like make a maypole and I dance around it by myself and like no one else is here to drink mead with me and honor the sun gods, right? There's things you can do about that. So first of all, what I like to do, and I live kind of like in the middle of nowhere. I mean, like I live in a town. Like sometimes I say like I live in the mountains in the woods, and that's like a little dramatic, but it's kind of true. I do live in Appalachia. Like I don't live like where there's like, like that far from civilization. Like I'm around civilization. I'm not particularly far from civilization. Um so I do interact with other human beings. I leave my house regularly. I touch grass. I'm a member of society. Society. I am a member of society. And so what I'll do is I want other people to celebrate with me. I'm an extrovert and I don't like feeling lonely. I, for so long, felt so lonely on pagan holidays, right? I would like celebrate the wheel of the year like alone. And it was just sad. It wasn't good. I would get like food and stuff and like, do my rituals. And my rituals were profound and I loved them. But what I realized is I can repaganize my community. And this is what you can do. What you're going to do, and you do have to be open about being a pagan to do this. I encourage everyone to be open. Like if you live somewhere where it's safe to be open and whatnot, like it's fine. Like it's not a big deal. People think you're a little weird, but like it's not like the end of the world. It's not like it's apocalyptic. Where I will invite people. So what I'll do is I'll do my rituals. I'll go for a hike. I always like to spend time in nature on holidays. And then I will host a party. I will invite, I mean, not like a rave or something or a rager. Like I just invite people to my house. I use the word party to kind of mean like large gathering. Where I'll get dressed up and I'll invite people to my house and there'll be like matching foods and there'll be cocktails and we'll all hang out, right? And I'll mention the holiday, be like, this is a spring solstice celebration. You're coming, or spring equinox. God, I always want to call spring equinox the spring solstice. And I know that's not correct, but it just sounds better, like spring solstice, spring equinox. Like the spring solstice sounds way better. I know it's equinox. I always want to call it solstice though. I'll invite them to my house and I say, come to my spring equinox party. And I'll put up like pagan decor. I even did this thing last year where I set out a little jar called an intention jar, where at my spring equinox party, people could drop an intention they wanted. And then I did a ritual the following day where I set all of those intentions for everyone at the party. And they started thinking about, intentions and the themes while also having a communal party they can go to. It gives your community more holidays to celebrate and more holidays to honor. And that's really good because if we want paganism to come out, we need to repaganize our community. We need to repaganize the world. We need to host that equinox party, invite people, host a summer solstice party, invite people, or you could do something like a summer solstice hike. You could be like, let's hike on the solstice and we're going to go on this awesome hike up the mountain and then we're going to have a picnic. A picnic could be cute too. You can connect to nature and have like Lammas or Lugnasada. I cannot pronounce this. I'm so sorry to any Celtic followers. Is coming up. You could host a picnic, like a, Lugnasada picnic, and you guys can honor Lu and, sit outside under the sun and feel the sun and feel the vibes. And everyone knows that holiday's happening. They know to honor it. They could even leave little offerings, right? If you put like little mini rituals at your parties, people want to do that, right? People like cute things like that. Like, say setting out an intention in a jar or something. People love that. And you can really make paganism normal and make it like something acceptable and, pro-social, right? You can incorporate it and people will start to believe. It works that way. It inspires people and they see your belief in the gods and they want to believe in the gods. Now, another thing I want to talk about is secular holidays and spiritualizing the secular because, there's no separation between anything, right? That's one of those metaphysical truths. There is no separation. And so one of the things you can do is you can spiritualize the non-spiritual. So the 4th of July just happened. I'm an American. You can think about your ancestors that day. I made a tweet about this where I was like, why don't we just reflect on our ancestors a little bit on the 4th of July if you're an American? Like, oh my God, my ancestors did that. We made a country. That's so cool. And then honor my American ancestors, right? It's a way to connect to your ancestors. With Thanksgiving, think about gratitude to the gods. You're being grateful for your family for having a nice meal with you and the pecan pie that your grandma makes really well. But you can also think about, what it means to be thankful and thank the gods and leave offerings, right? You can really spiritualize everything. And I think that makes those holidays come more alive and keeps you thinking about the gods more often because after all, thinking about the gods a lot is a big part of our spiritual growth because once again, intention is not everything, but it is a thing. So that's kind of all I have to say about holidays. Holidays, it's a fun conversation, but it can be kind of stressful. We really have to think outside the box as pagans and, encourage other people. And I really recommend if you feel that loneliness, find ways to fight against it, right? You don't deserve to feel lonely on your sacred day. That's all I kind of have to say. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you're on YouTube. Please follow if you're on, a podcasting platform. This podcast is supported through Patreon. I was locked out of the podcast Patreon for a while, but I'm back in, thankfully. If you join the Patreon, you get a bonus episode 8 times a year on the Wiccan sabbats. You get early access to all the pods, and it's a good time over there. You also get a bonus pre-show that I record alongside every single episode, except the specials. The specials don't get a pre-show. And I am also a professional astrologer and tarot reader. My booking information will be in the description of whatever you're watching. I also host the Dot Darling YouTube channel that is on the same YouTube channel you're listening to this podcast on, or if you're on a podcasting platform, just go to YouTube, type in Dot Darling. I also am a Substack blogger. I write 2 articles a month on Substack. I also am on Instagram, I'm on Twitter/X, and I'm on TikTok. I also post on Threads. I kind of just like, I don't post much interesting stuff on Threads. I kind of just like talk about my Instagram stuff on Threads. And yeah, I'm really kind of everywhere there is to be found. Yeah, and have an amazing day, afternoon, mid morning, mid evening, wherever time it ever it is, wherever you are. This has been Pagan Perspectives with Georgina Rose. Have an amazing day. Bye.